Welcome to Agri-Food Conversations, brought to you by iSelect, the Van Trump Report, the Yield Lab Institute, and Family Farms Group. I'm Hannah Hund, an analyst on the iSelect Fund Ventures team, and I'm excited to welcome you all to today's discussion. Agri-Food Conversations is all about driving innovation in agriculture. Each month, we highlight a specific theme, including emerging topics such as soil health, plant genetics, vertical farming, and aquaculture, to name a few. This month's theme is Food is Health, and on today's call, we're joined by Ed Rogers, CEO of Bonumose. Bonumose is developing a proprietary, cost-effective enzymatic process to bring natural, low-glycemic sugars to market. The company takes starches left over from, for example, potato processing, and leveraging the natural power of enzymes, develops them into naturally occurring ingredients in industrial-scale quantities. Today's webinar will also include a discussion of Bonumose's patented process, one which permits the mass market application of Tagatose and other nutritious sugars. Each of you knows companies are more likely to succeed with the right network of customers, talent, investors, and advisors. We have invited you to this call because you are some of the smartest, most talented people in Bonumose's market. You are potential customers for Bonumose's products and services. You have built a company similar to Bonumose, or you are a sophisticated business person or agricultural professional who understands the market and the challenges and opportunities Bonumose may face. Before we get started, we have a quick poll question to get a better idea of who we have on the call today. Please take a few seconds to answer. And while we have that poll up, a few process comments. We are not soliciting investment. This presentation is to provide information to help Bonumose find customers, mentors, and other strategic relationships that can help them grow their business. You are all on mute. You can use the chat window to ask a question at any time. This presentation is being recorded and will be available for replay. So without further ado, I am pleased to introduce Ed Rogers, CEO of Bonumose.
Thank you, Hannah. Hannah, do you want me to go through these 3 slides that are at the beginning?
Oh yeah, you can just track through them. That'd be fine.
Okay. All right, thanks a lot, Hannah. Appreciate it. Appreciate the opportunity to talk about Bonumose, and thank you to those who have joined today and will join later on recording. The first takeaway from the presentation today, I hope, is that nutritious sugar actually is a real thing, and that Bonumose will make it affordable for the mass market. And we have a pretty simple business model. So here's an overview of what we're doing. We will use our step change technology advantage to manufacture nutritious sugars far less expensively than anyone else, trending, we think, to high fructose corn syrup levels. And then we're going to sell them globally through top-tier food ingredient distribution partners. And those will be sold primarily to food and beverage companies, but we do have some other ideas and some optionality on revenue streams, as I'll talk about in a little bit. First of all, what are rare sugars? So rare sugars are naturally occurring, in this case, Tagatose and allulose are found in tiny amounts in some fruits and grains, but so small that they cannot be harvested. Fortunately, they can be made from other things, and in our case, Bonumose can make them from abundant plant-derived starch, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So sugar, or sucrose, is the gold standard for sweeteners. It's got great taste, and it also does multiple other things in food besides impart sweetness. It provides bulk. It caramelizes, it depresses the freezing point in ice cream for a creamy, smooth feel. It reduces water activity in baked goods. It provides many benefits to foods beyond just the sweetness. And as the gold standard, any alternative, no matter how healthy, will be compared against this standard. And we think Tagatose compares very well. Now, there will be, we believe, lots of winning solutions for sugar reduction. But we think, and we hope to show you that Bonumose has the opportunity to be among the biggest of the winners. So Tagatose and allulose, those are the two main sugars that we can produce. They have superb taste. They taste very much like regular sugar, almost the same sweetness. Tagatose is 90% as sweet, and allulose is 70% as sweet. And not only do they taste good themselves, but they actually make other sweeteners, such as stevia, taste better. They are fully bulking, so they provide the bulking that's necessary for foods without having to add any bulking agents, such as maltodextrin or dextrose or some other bulking agent. You can bake with them. They caramelize. They depress the freezing point in ice cream. They reduce water activity in baked goods. They can do the frosting in cereals. They do all the things that regular sugar does. They are naturally occurring, as I mentioned earlier. They will enjoy some favorable labeling on the nutrition facts panel. Allulose has already been exempted from the definition of sugar for purposes of the nutrition facts panel, and Tagatose is next in line. We expect that the Tagatose exemption will come this year. At least we're hopeful. The FDA does seem to have their hands full with some sort of sickness that's going around, so we'll see. And both of these sugars have multiple health benefits, which I'll talk about now. So dental health, neither Tagatose nor allulose will cause dental cavities. They do not feed the bugs in your mouth that produce the acids that lead to cavities. In fact, Tagatose is so interesting that there has been a patent application filed by a dentist to use it in dental offices as the thing that is sprayed on teeth to remove plaque, because Tagatose has anti-plaque, anti-dental biofilm properties. Both are extremely healthy for blood. They do not increase blood sugar levels. They actually have the effect of reducing blood sugar levels. So when eaten along with either high starch or high sugar foods, Tagatose and allulose will help attenuate the rise in blood sugar caused by those other foods. They also have beneficial effects on cholesterol. They're very good for weight control. They're low calorie. So allulose is essentially 0 calories, and Tagatose is about 40% of the calories of regular sugar. And Tagatose also has been demonstrated over the past 20 years to provide a sense of satiety, so a sense of fullness. Tagatose, very interestingly, is treated in the body like dietary fiber. So it bypasses the small intestine, goes into the large intestine where it feeds the good gut bacteria, does not feed the bad gut bacteria, but actually provides food for the probiotics that are in your colon and producing short chain fatty acids and all the good things that come along with good dietary fiber. And then not finally, but finally on this slide, they have antiviral and anti-cancer benefits, which I'll discuss some more in a minute. Those links on the bottom of the slide, you can click those and get a long list of fully footnoted health benefits. Now, we did not invent Tagatose, we did not invent allulose, and we did not invent the only processes for making these sugars. The problem is that the existing processes for making Tagatose and allulose are very expensive, really too expensive to be suitable for mass market adoption. And the reason is because they're very inefficient. They produce Tagatose or allulose, but at very low yields. And I think the reason for that is that the companies that are doing it now, the incumbents that are doing it now, are just that. They're incumbents. They've got the mindset of large companies. They're used to using a single enzyme to convert, to partially convert glucose to fructose to make high fructose corn syrup. And so, okay, they use a single enzyme which can convert, in some cases, fructose to allulose, and the yield's about 27%. And the reason the yield is about 27% is because every enzymatic reaction is reversible. And the reaction achieves an equilibrium, so I'm throwing a little science at you here, an equilibrium between the reactant and the product. And it's governed by something called the reaction equilibrium constant. It cannot be changed. And that constant happens to favor fructose over allulose. And so when you try to convert fructose to allulose, your yields are going to be in the range of about 27%. You have to keep in mind that the fructose itself is produced from glucose at only about 40% yields. And so the effective yield from glucose is about 10%. Similar inefficiencies apply to the tagatose production, which generally now starts with lactose, milk sugar, which is split into glucose and galactose. And after that's purified to get only the galactose left, that can be converted to tagatose. But again, it's very low yields because they're using a single enzyme and which has these unfavorable features that result in very, very low yields and hence high cost. Well, not being restricted by the old mindset, Bonumose had a breakthrough. What Bonumose has done is combine several enzymes, not a single enzyme, but several enzymes into a cascade enzymatic reaction that is irreversible. So the final step of that cascade reaction is irreversible. It's sort of like if you imagine water flowing over a waterfall. It's not going to go uphill, and it results in extremely high yields that approach 90% yields. And this allows us to, as I mentioned earlier, trend toward high fructose corn syrup levels, and we believe that we have line of sight to that. We're not just doing it at the lab scale. Thanks to some our existing investors, including iSelect Fund, we have successfully run a pilot plant that produced a ton of tagatose, actually more than a ton. And those are going as samples to early adopter customers. And we're very fortunate that some of those early adopter customers are very large household name companies. We like all customers, including the entrepreneurs, but it's nice to have some of the household names that are taking a serious interest in leaning into what Bonumose is doing. We're now moving to commercial scale, where we will be producing in volumes that are sufficient to satisfy the early market demand. This is using standard equipment, the same type of equipment that you would see in a high fructose corn syrup plant. And there's some potential to repurpose such plants, and I'll talk about that some more in a minute. And this is a really an enormous market here. The market for sugar is globally over $100 billion a year. And so it's an enormous market, and we can do quite well only with a small portion of that market. So we are very fortunate to have developed a relationship with the #1 sugar company in the world, ASR Group, which is the parent of Domino's Sugar. I've been working with them for a couple of years. We worked with them on the pilot plant. A fantastic company, have gotten to know dozens of their people from all aspects of the company, and they are our exclusive distribution partner for North America. They have extensive expertise in developing various foods and beverages using different types of sweeteners, including, of course, sugar. And they have developed some exciting projects working with CPGs using tagatose. They, of course, also have deep relationships with these CPGs, relationships that we would be hard-pressed to build up ourselves in a short period of time or even a long period of time. And so our strategy is to work with companies such as ASR to go to market. We will do the same thing in other parts of the world. And we also have some other interesting partnerships that we're developing on the feedstock side as well as some other aspects of the business. So as I mentioned earlier, there's some optionality in the revenue stream. The primary focus is B2B, but we see an opportunity with B2C as well. Most of the sugar alternatives that are out there are pretty high priced and may not taste all that great and may not really work the way you want regular sugar to work. I think it's kind of hard for, you know, a mother of 3 who's trying to feed her family to justify buying, you know, $10 or $14 a pound sweetener. We see ourselves being able to be on the left-hand side of this slide, down there around the cost of organic cane sugar. We're pretty excited about bringing out a consumer branded product as well. Now, here's where I want to talk a little bit more about how we could reuse high fructose corn syrup plants, some of which are becoming dormant. These are operated by the the four horsemen of the health apocalypse. Maybe that's not fair. I guess there's a few more than four of them. But the process that they use is, and this is a simplified version, is you take starch, there's a dextrinization process. So you produce, let's say, maltodextrin. That is then converted to glucose. And then the glucose is converted partially to high fructose corn syrup. If you want to get high fructose corn syrup 55, there's some purification and recycling steps that need to be done. So it's a little bit more complicated, but this is the basic process. And it's been done for, I guess about 50 years or so. Maybe another 50 years, but it's certainly something that is on the decline. Well, just as General Motors is starting to make ventilators in car factories, and just as swords can be beat into plowshares, we think that we can take these high fructose corn syrup plants. They use the same equipment that we do, and we can repurpose them. So instead of producing something that arguably harms you, these factories will produce something that is nourishing to the human body. Same equipment, same methods, we just have a better enzyme set. We eliminate certain processing steps, so that eliminate costs. And then we have a really simple purification and crystallization process. Sorry, going the wrong direction. We do have a very solid patent portfolio, not just patents pending, but patents granted. We have patents granted in the United States on a broadly described Tagatose process, and just got one on an allulose process. We also have patents in Japan, in Korea, in Mexico, in China of all places, and then a few other countries that I've forgotten. Well, here's a list on the side. I could probably interpret that. Singapore, South America, and a growing list. We have a huge number of patent applications on file covering many, many countries. And this is, at the time I could mention that these patents cover more than just Tagatose and allulose, but actually cover a platform that we have for producing additional healthy sugars that will have some relevance to dietary supplements, to plant inputs, to animal feed, pharmaceuticals, as well as biochemical feedstocks. So there's a lot we can do with the enzymatic technology platform that we have built, and we're looking forward to doing that. Our job number one is to get Tagatose and allulose produced in commercial quantities, but then we have several other things in the pipeline. Now, I will mention that we have been flattered by some imitators. The Chinese Academy of Sciences actually filed a patent application that was essentially a copycat of ours. Very interesting provenance to that. We successfully defended against that in the United States and also beat them back in China. So actually in front of a Chinese governmental agency, beat another arm of the Chinese government. So, that's one for the books. And then there are some other companies that we have noticed recently have been filing patent applications with processes that are very similar to ours, but we do have patent priority. Now, to talk about the why of our company, obviously part of the why is to generate income and wealth. I mean, this is of course why we're doing this, but it is broader than that. I don't want to pick on sugar too much, but sugar has been linked to diabetes and other issues. And diabetes is a complicated phenomena, and there's no single cause, but there is a link, or at least some evidence of a link between excess consumption of regular sugar and diabetes. And so, whereas I mentioned earlier that Tagatose, that sugar is a 100 billion plus global market opportunity, if you look at it from a healthcare lens, we're talking almost $1 trillion that is spent on combating diabetes globally every year. And so in terms of cost savings to society, we think we can have an impact there as well. Now, recently, in response to what's going on with COVID, a CEO of a leading CPG was interviewed about the effect on his company's business. And he said that what's happening is that people are in their homes and they're retreating to, or they're going to comfort foods, to snack foods, to junk foods. And so he thinks his business will be just fine. And this may be right. I mean, this may be true, but I don't know if it's right. And it's ironic because sugar, excess sugar in the bloodstream, excess glucose in the bloodstream actually has been shown to depress immunity and help grow viruses. And so by retreating to junk foods, they may actually be making the problem worse. And so that's something that we hope to solve for. Quick note on sustainability. As was mentioned at the outset, we can use waste starch sources. Now we can use just regular run-of-the-mill cornstarch or other starches that are produced, every day. But we can also use sort of some interesting other sources. So one of them is when potatoes are cut for French fries, there is starch left over. You could call it sawdust. It's like potato sawdust, and that is pretty clean starch, and we can use that. We have used that. And it works in our process. Another one is in the production of plant-based protein, there is often, probably always, a lot of starch left over. With the yellow pea, which is a very good protein source from vegetables, there's 2 parts of starch for every 1 part of protein. With a chickpea, there's 3 parts of starch for every 1 part of protein. And with potato, there's actually 8 parts of starch for every 1 part of protein. So with the growth of plant-based protein, we see opportunities to utilize some of those stranded starch sources, and we have those conversations occurring right now. On water, just quick anecdote or a quick factoid: the amount of water that is required to grow either the corn or potato or yellow pea or some of these other starch sources is in order to produce, say, 1 pound of Tagatose is much less than the water that's required to grow sugarcane to produce 1 pound of sugar. So there's a bit of a sustainability story there. On energy, an interesting thing about Tagatose is that you can bake with it and it caramelizes and all of that good stuff. It actually does that at a slightly lower temperature. So when you're baking cookies or bread, the temperature at which it will brown, which is a desirable reaction, that is lower for Tagatose than it is for sucrose. And same thing in caramelization. So there may be an opportunity for confectionery companies and bakers to be able to reduce temperature, reduce time and temperature in cooking their products, and therefore save energy. And then finally, one of the UN Sustainable Development Goals is on health and well-being. And we were fortunate enough to even be invited to speak to the UN last fall about Tagatose. So I want to mention a few people on our team. It's very heavy on the science side. I am not a scientist, but my co-founder, Dr. Dan Wichelecki, he's the inventor of our technology. He invented the Tagatose process around which we built the company and formed the company, and then has extended that into allulose and multiple other healthy sugars. Dr. Wagner is the one who was able to come up with the method of affixing all of our enzymes on a single scaffolding, let's call it, that would allow them to be used in a continuous production process like is done in high fructose corn syrup. So we have patent applications filed on that as well. Dr. Sala came from DuPont Genencor, where he worked for 15 years with that major enzyme company. And then our most recent hire, who started last month, is Mansour Pasha, who came from Ingredion and ran one of their high fructose corn syrup plants, and he's helping us build our first plant. And this is my last slide. I probably left out some things that I wanted to say, but I do want to close with this thought. At the ISELEX conference last year, the one formerly known as Davos, someone said from the stage that healthy sugar that tastes great and works like regular sugar in food, that's the Holy Grail. And while we appreciate that, and we appreciate that sentiment. There is something missing if the healthy sugar is not affordable for the average person. I would say that there are holes in the holiness if the nutritious sugar and the products that that sugar goes in are affordable only for, let's say, mothers in Tribeca and not for mothers shopping at the Dollar General store in rural Mississippi. And that's another illustration of that point. For those of you old enough to remember the movie Raiders of the Lost Ark, the Grail was not the golden goblet, the jewel-encrusted golden goblet that only a rich person could afford. Indiana Jones, he chose the plain-looking cup, and he said, "This is the cup of a carpenter." So as we build Bonumose, that's who we're thinking about. We're thinking about the carpenter. So thank you very much. That's all I had to say.
Perfect, and thank you, Ed, so much for joining us. I'm gonna go ahead and open this up to any questions that our audience may have. And actually, I have one from Anna already. What is kind of your biggest obstacle to get to the market at your current scale? 1 ton maybe, whatever your scale is. What's the price per pound of ready product?
Yeah, so we're not producing it for sale at the 1 ton level. It's just not inefficient. It's not efficient at that scale, and so that's really going out just for sampling. At the 1,000, we're going to be doing 1,000 tons or higher as our first plant, and that will allow us to sell Tagatose at a very attractive price point, and allulose at a very attractive price point compared to the existing sellers of allulose. The cost of Tagatose today is just really out of the roof. Allulose is a little bit better priced, but we'll be able to offer a competitive price compared to what allulose is selling for today. And by the way, that allulose that's being sold for today is usually a GMO allulose, and ours will be non-GMO certified because we're going to use a starch source that is non-GMO. In terms of the biggest hurdle, I mean, the biggest hurdle, frankly, is capital to get the plant in the ground. We have it designed, we have the bids back on the equipment, and we're currently, in a fundraise for that.
Yeah, and I'd like to remind attendees that if they want to ask a question, there's a Q&A box in about the center pop-up of the screen that you can use to ask a question. Or if you raise your hand, I can unmute you and you can ask your question out loud. Kind of piggybacking on Anna's question, I guess, outside of fundraising and scaling, what do you see as kind of some of the greatest challenges in creating healthy products that can appeal to lots of consumers?
Sure. So this is what's great about Tagatose in particular, and frankly, between the two, we think Tagatose is the better one. It tastes so much like regular sugar. I mean, it's you could eat it with a spoon. Because of its functionality, the way it works in food, the way that regular sugar does, it's not quite a drop-in replacement, but it's essentially a drop-in replacement. So you can have candy bars made out of it. You could use it in beverages. You can use it in ice cream, in baked goods, in hard candies, in yogurt. I mean, it can go in anything that sugar goes in today. So there's not really a limitation there. We've got a great partner with ASR Group that works with these companies on formulations, because it's not exactly like just changing your recipe and swapping out one thing for the other, but it's not that much different than that. I would say that the biggest hurdle today is regulatory. It's bureaucracy. It's the fact, no offense to my friends at the FDA, but we have been waiting now for 2 years for them to issue a decision on our request to have Tagatose exempted. It meets all of the criteria that they use to exempt allulose from added sugars, but for some reason, they have not acted on our request. I don't know why that reason would be. One could speculate, but they have not done so yet. And that's, I think, a big hurdle, and I hope they're listening.
Great. And Anna has kind of a follow-up question. You kind of mentioned your partnership with ASR. She wonders, are they likely to become a customer, or are they involved in doing any proof of concept?
Well, so I don't want to get into too much detail about the nature of a relationship with them, other than saying it's very close. But it's not so much of a customer relationship as it is a partnership. They will be the front-facing firm when it comes to the CPGs, and they have these great relationships, and oftentimes we're part of those conversations as well. But we're not too smart, but we're smart enough to know that ASR is better at selling a sugar alternative than we are at selling a sugar alternative. They are really excited about this. Their customers are asking for this sort of thing. A lot of their customers are already very familiar with Tagatose and allulose. They've just been waiting for the price to come down. So, so I hope that helps elaborate on the relationship there.
Yes, thank you. We have another question from Meg Brigman. She says, thank you so much for the presentation, Ed. It was really interesting. What areas do you see Bonumose making an impact on first?
So broadly, it'll be food, but there are other things that we can do. And then to dig in with food some more, I think it's going to be confectionery. I wouldn't have said that originally, but I think that we're going to make the biggest impact on confectionery. I think next will be sweetened fruits, so dried fruits, and then also ready-to-eat cereal, and then dairy. And dairy would include yogurt and ice cream, as well as potentially these alternative milk products that that often have sugar in them. So those are the ones I think that would be first. And maybe to get even more granular on confectionery, I think that we will at first replace polyols, so sugar alcohols, in sugar-free products. But then I think soon thereafter we will be coming online with some of the name brand products that are fully sugared, and Tagatose will either replace the sugar or help reduce the sugar in those products. And by the way,
Great,
let me just sort of add in there, we are not thinking at all that we will replace all sugar in the world. In fact, we don't need to replace very much sugar to have an enormously successful company. We think we can have the greater impact on public health the more sugar that we replace. But it is such an enormous market, and sugar is in so many different things, that even a very tiny replacement would mean a very attractive opportunity, a very attractive company for Bonumose. So, we're not getting ahead of ourselves and saying that we're going to replace 20 or even 10 or even 5% of the sugar market.
Great. Yeah, thank you for that perspective. One question that I have is, if this on the label doesn't count as an added sugar, does it go down as a carbohydrate, as dietary fiber? How do you kind of work with the labeling?
Yeah, good question. So allulose will be labeled as a carbohydrate. So it'll be under total carbohydrates. It won't be under sugar, but it'll be under total carbohydrates. So it won't be counted in added sugar or in total sugars. Tagatose is different. So, or potentially different, depending on how the FDA moves and how soon they move. In addition to being exempted from sugar, or in addition to requesting an exemption from sugar definition, we've also requested that the FDA recognize that Tagatose is dietary fiber as far as the body is concerned. The problem is that Tagatose is a monosaccharide, and the FDA's definition of fiber requires that the molecule be at least 3 units long. So it has to be a degree of polymerization of 3 or more. Well, the Tagatose as a monosaccharide has a degree of polymerization of only 1. Some international bodies that have looked at fiber have said that, well, yeah, sure, a monosaccharide could be a fiber. And Tagatose fits the other definitions of fiber in terms of having a physiological effect that is beneficial for human health. That's undoubtable. So we are hopeful that the FDA will recognize that it should be classifiable as fiber. And frankly, it makes a lot of sense because people need to know how much fiber they're getting in their foods. And if that's if it's a stealth fiber, that's not helping anybody.
Certainly, and that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. We have another question from Anna. Anna asks, are you planning on creating your brand or pushing it as an ingredient? Will it be Bonumose or allulose tagatose?
Yeah, so complicated analysis there. The short answer is that we will have a brand. It will probably not be Bonumose's Tagatose. We will come up with some other brand name for purposes of the B2C. And there are some synergies and tie-ins with the B2B product where it's an ingredient going into food. The reason that B2B is our focus is because that's where about 90% of sugar is consumed today, is already in foods and beverages. But of course, there's a lot of opportunity with B2C as well. It's a very big market. As one of my earlier slides showed, it's $500 million market, at least in the United States alone, for alternatives to regular sugar. There'll be a brand name. It's almost certainly not going to be Bonumose as the brand name, but there will be a brand name and a branded a branded Tagatose on the shelf, and branded Tagatose, we hope, at sweetening stations, at quick serve restaurants and C-stores. We're not planning on coming up with some new name for the product itself. We think, I guess you could call it truth in advertising. We think the name is Tagatose. We're going to call it Tagatose, but it'll be our branded version of Tagatose.
Great. And I guess kind of as you look forward to kind of where you see your company in the future, what is kind of your timeline that you perceive to be for kind of this branding rollout and getting to market?
Well, we think we'll be in the market in 2021 as an ingredient, and that's what we're really pushing hard on. We've got, as I mentioned, the engineering drawings done, and the equipment has been bid, and so we're moving forward with those plans as best we can, considering the distractions that are going on in the world right now. And then we would like to roll out the consumer brand at the same time. It makes it more real. Frankly, it makes it more real for my mother and father to be able to see it on the shelf. So, for my wife and my children to be able to see it on the shelf. And we want consumers to be able to enjoy it too, and not have it only be in their favorite candy bar or cereal. We think it's important for those who are trying to feed healthy products to their children to be able to go into a grocery store and to find affordable, great tasting, fully functional, healthy sugars on the shelf. And so we plan on rolling it out, right away. So look for it in 2021.
Wow, and certainly we are all looking forward to trying this all out. I know I am. Well, great. Ed, thank you so much. Attendees, if there are any final questions, I would submit them now. But kind of in wrapping up, one of my kind of last questions would be, what can the audience help you out with here, and how can they best find you?
They can find me through the email that's on the screen. And our website is bonumose.com. Pretty easy to find. And as far as helping out, I don't know. It just depends on who's on the call and who listens to this later. But always happy to talk.
Perfect. Great. Well, Ed, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a pleasure to have you, and a very interesting product, and certainly very excited for your future, and congratulations on all of your progress.
Well, thank you very much for pulling this together, Hannah, and thank you to iSelect Fund. You guys are great partners.
Perfect. Great. Well, We host these calls every week at 3 p.m. Central. You can register for the AgriFood Conversations webinar series by going to agrifoodconversations.com. A replay of this webinar will be emailed to you in the next 24 hours. And if you know anyone else who may want to see this webinar in replay, they will also be able to access it on agrifoodconversations.com. Thank you all.